Well, welcome to our 2023-2024 Budget Information Question and Answer session. So I'm so glad to be here with all of you today to talk over this budget. And I guess I'm going to look up there at no one as well. We have such an excellent finance committee and, of course, our wonderful treasurer who have worked extremely hard to bring this to you. I'm so grateful for the amazing collaborative and inclusive process that led to this wise and balanced budget. UU CVille is taking a comprehensive approach to managing all our human, physical, and financial resources. One of the important steps that the board took this year was to appoint a stewardship steering committee to take a big picture approach to this management. They've begun focusing on a long-range stewardship planning. Of course, one of the most important parts of our financial management is the development of the budget. This year, the budget process began with the Finance Committee and our board vice president, Bev Ryan, contacting the various groups and committees throughout the congregation to determine every group's wants and needs. The Personnel Committee also worked extremely hard in evaluating all the UUA's recommendations for salary and benefits for all staff. And since everything changed this year, that was quite a task, and they did an absolutely fabulous job. Then the Finance Committee considered all this information and developed a list of priorities for the budget, and it was an amazingly impressive collaboration. And thanks to all the hard work of our pledge drive folks, and especially our co-chairs, Haley Owens and Bob Brett, we had a hugely successful pledge drive. Our Finance Committee considered this success and our priorities to come up with an impressive budget. The Finance Committee unanimously approved sending it to the board for review, and the board voted unanimously to approve this budget and bring it to the congregation for a vote on June 4th. So not only am I grateful that we have such an excellent budget, but I'm even more appreciative that the process of developing this budget has been reflective of our UU values. We have listened carefully to each other, valued everyone's ideas, and had respect and transparency throughout. UU CVille is extremely fortunate to have a treasurer and a finance committee who are not only good with numbers and wise about comprehensive stewardship, but who also carry the big picture vision of who we are as a community and as a force for love and kindness in the world. And now I turn it over to Kay to go through all this with the numbers.
Thank you, Pam. So I have a fair number of slides to go through, and I'm going to move through them pretty quickly. We're not going to focus on line item by line item of the budget, but what I do want to focus on is a little bit about the budget process. I want to talk about the funding priorities that we put together, and I want to talk about what is funded and what is not funded in this budget. And also spend a little bit of time on the program budget, because that has changed this year and how we're putting information together to make it more meaningful and transparent to our congregation. And then time for any questions that you may have, comments that you may have. So I'm gonna get right into it. Sean, can you change the slide, please? Do want to let everyone know that there is, on the website, there's a tremendous amount of information. We post a monthly dashboard of where we are within our fiscal year, of revenues, expenditures. There's also information on the social action collection available there, and there's information on 3 years of budget information. If you need more detailed information within the board minutes or monthly reports, and anyone can always email myself or Sean if there's a question about our finances. Next slide. As Pam said, this was a little bit different process this year. Sometimes, I have only 2 years experience with the budget process, but I noticed a marked difference this year. One is the collaboration across committees. Personnel Committee met with Finance Committee, going over their recommendations and the reasons for their recommendations. There was early on conversations with our ministers and our staff. And so not only did we rely on historical trends, but we also gained, I think, a better understanding between the committees of what our priorities are and how to bring them to fruition. We went into this with knowing that we would propose a balanced budget. That was a given. And we also went into this knowing that we wanted to continue on a path to improve our financial stability. The groups that were instrumental in preparing this budget, certainly the Finance Committee, but also the Personnel Committee, the Board of Trustees, Reverend Tim, Reverend Leah, of course Sean, and a huge shout out to Bev Ryan as our Vice President, just coordinating with the Personnel Committee, but also reaching out to all of our groups and individuals that might have needed funding. And we wanted to make sure that everyone's voice was heard as we put this budget together. Next slide. So our established priorities early on was to fund our developmental minister salary for 12 months. In this current year, his position is only funded for 11 months. He started work in August of this fiscal year. So we knew that we needed to fund that additional month. We wanted to support our ongoing ministries and any new ministries. Fair and equitable pay continues to be a high priority for our congregation. Increasing line item budgets where it was needed, but you'll also see a few decreases in line items where it's not needed. We wanted to increase our reserve funds, and we have a no-interest loan that is at $39,000 right now. It was a 10-year loan. I think we're into our 4th or 5th year. At the 10th year, we start paying interest on that. So it's a priority to get that loan paid off. Next slide. So what we have been able to fund in this budget is the 12-month salary for the developmental ministry. We have funded salary increases and the increase in costs for health care insurance. And the range for the salaries is 1% to 4%. It's not across the board salary increase. The values that we had in preparing and looking at salary increases, we were very aware of a gender gap between our male and female employees, and that's a gap that we've wanted to close. We wanted to cover the increase in cost of the healthcare benefits, and we wanted to move more of our staff to midpoint and pay a living wage for our lower paying employees. We were not able to achieve all of that. We had a pool of money and we applied it using those values to determine raises for the various staff. Next slide. This budget supports the continued dual platform and video editing that's become so important for our ministries. It increases line items for ground maintenance, utilities, professional services, and we've increased childcare. Childcare has become very important to our ministries, particularly after service, and so that children can be in the playground with care while their parents are enjoying social time. Next slide. We were also able to fund the request from staff and committees to continue our ministries. We've added a small amount of funding for 2 new groups. One is our young adults who are forming and need a little bit of money to get them on their way. And the second is to support some new women's ministries. It also supports a $5,000 payment on our $39,000 no-interest loan. Next slide. Things we were not able to fully fund. We had hoped to increase our UUA contribution. but we're not able to do that this year. It will remain at $5,000. Our fair share contribution should be in the $37,000 range. We're far from meeting that, but we're just not able to do more than the $5,000 in this budget. We wanted to increase our building maintenance dollars more than what we could. We were able to add a few dollars, but not the amount that we truly wanted to. And this budget does not have funding to increase our reserve funds. But a note on that is that we have been able through this year to increase our reserve funds. As certain accounts close out and are designated funding, we've been able to bring those reserve funds up to $11,000 for our Buildings and Grounds Reserve Fund and $11,000 for our operating reserve funds. So they are growing, just not at the rate that we would hope that they would grow. Next slide. There's an important change in our budget that I would like to make everyone aware of. We're moving the social action collections to designated funding, as if we would with all of our donated, supported activities. And the reasons we want to do this is that it provides us for a much easier way to have transparency and also for accounting management and getting checks cut quicker and being able to account for that money to the congregation. We're currently posting the social action disbursements online and more information online, and we'll be able to do that more and more. The other thing about the social action collections in our operating budget, it's a pass-through. So it really escalates our bottom line that doesn't represent our operating budget well. It's $1 in and $1 out. It does not support the operations of our congregation. But we wanted to acknowledge this and bring it forward in a way, in a better way, and with a lot more transparency and a lot more communication to the congregation about the social action collections. And Reverend Tim is correct. This year, I looked today, and we're at $35,000 for social action collections for this year. So that's an amazing figure. Next slide. In summary, our revenues are increasing 3.5%, and our expenditures are increasing 3.5%. Next slide. Just a few slides about our line item budget. Our revenues, 84% of it is made up from our pledge drive, and we received over $500,000 in pledges. For a budgeting amount, the Finance Committee uses 95% of our pledged amount for budgeting number, thinking that we may not collect 100% of our pledges, but we're doing really well, much better than historically we have in the past, but that's how we get to a budget number. So 16% of our revenue is through other sources. Next slide. A couple of significant things on this slide. One is our building user fees and non-pledged donations. They have returned to pre-COVID levels, and we're really happy to see that. So we're able to increase those amounts that we're projecting for this coming fiscal year. But there are two small revenue sources that we no longer have. One is Amazon Smiles, and one is our bed and breakfast program. Both of Amazon stopped their program, and the B&B program just has not been as successful as we would hope in the past few years. On fundraising, we have a really great fundraising team. That team met and talked about what they were comfortable with in the goals for next year. And so this is a little bit decreased on the fundraising from what we have in our current year, but we think it's realistic. It's probably a little conservative, but we would rather be conservative rather than not meeting our goals. Next slide. This is a breakdown of all of our line items in our next year's budget. You'll see that payroll and benefits remain our largest expenditure, and that's 75% of our expenditures. And you can see the other breakdown for the congregational administration is our second one that pays all of our utilities, keeps us in operation, buildings and grounds, all those things that support all of our other ministries. And this will be online so that if you want to, it's already online, so if you want to look at it closer and send me any questions that you might have. Next slide. A purpose of a program budget is really to organize your resources into program areas that relate to our mission and our goals and our values. And to make it more relevant of the program budget this year, we asked staff to estimate how much time they are spending in each of our ministry areas or our program areas. This is the first year that they've done that, so it is an estimate, but they really gave thought to how much time they spend with congressional administration, faith witness, faith development, worship, and our beloved community. Congressional administration is all those things that support all other programs. It's keeping the doors open. It's taking care of our grounds. It's paying our financial fees and our professional fees. It gets people paid. Without that support, none of the other things would happen. Faith witness is the things that we give to the community. It's our external programs. It's social justice work and all the work that we do in the community. Faith development is our religious education, both youth and adult. Worship is everything that happens on Sundays. It's also music and the support for the hybrid services. And then our beloved community. It's our internal, it's how we care about each other, how we support each other. So staff estimated the time that they spend in these program areas. So the next slide that you see is the consolidation of that information. So next slide. So you can see that in this slide, worship staff is spending an estimate of 26% of their time on Sunday services and everything that happens during our worship services. The congressional administration is 34% of their time. Faith witness is in ministry, the beloved community is roughly 12% for the beloved community and 6% for the faith witness. And then our faith development is 22% of their time. RE falls under faith development. Next slide. So the next series of slides adds the staff time into the line items that support each of our programs. And this first one is congressional administration. And you can see that 58% or 44% of our budget supports congressional administration. 58% of that is staff time and salaries, and then the other line items that go along with that. But it's very helpful to know how much staff time it takes. This is, of course, Sean's position that goes into this, our office assistant, part of Reverend Tim's time, and a small piece of Reverend Leah's time would go into congressional administration. Next slide. Faith witness is approximately 6% of our budget. What this does not show is that the amount of money that we're collecting through social action collection. It also does not show all of the time that we as a congregation give to our communities, all of the time and talent and wisdom. Next slide. Faith development is approximately 19% of our budget, and this is RE, childcare, our new ministries, and staff time that's dedicated to faith development. Next slide. Worship is approximately 22% of our budget. This includes music, the pianist, worship support, taking care of our instruments, tuning, and technical support, and the staff cost that's dedicated to that. Next slide. And our beloved community, caring for each other. This is 9% of our budget expenditures. Again, this does not include the work that CareNet does, the pastoral visitors. A big part of this is staff time. This is Reverend Leah and Reverend Tim administering pastoral services to our congregation. Next slide. This shows the summary of all the programs and breaks it down by percentage. So you can see that congregational administration is our largest part, followed by worship, faith development, beloved community, and faith witness. There is a small slice in here for debt service. That's the little green. Next slide. So it's time to thank us all, because without all of us, none of this would happen. With our pledges, all the work, Finance Committee, Personnel Committee, all those folks that have contributed to putting this budget together, but not just this budget, supporting stewardship within our congregation in so many ways. So that's a very brief overview of our budget. If you want to spend some time delving into line items, and if you have any questions, please just email myself or Sean. And anyone have questions or comments at this point? Ann?
Well, I thought this was such a successful fund drive, and it really surprised me that there were some big areas that you really weren't able to fund. And so my question is, have you thought about, what kind of budget level would allow us to fund those things? And what things, are high on the list?
So one of the slides showed that 84% of our budget is supported by pledges. And this is my personal opinion, that we need to find ways to have less reliant on pledges and build up some of the other sources. Either through fundraising or building rentals, improving that. And I think this is some of the work of the Stewardship Steering Committee, to be forward thinking of how we can increase those other revenues and bring people together to make that happen. But to be able to not constantly rely on huge increases in a pledge drive. We will certainly have increases, but looking for ways to expand that other block of other funding. A very, very long-term picture is to improve our endowment in planned giving and get our endowment to a point where that interest can actually support our operating budget. But that's a very long-term goal. That answer? So Ann's question was, what are the top priorities to put more money into? Paying our staff fairly and equitably, putting more money into our buildings and our grounds and being able to care for those, building our reserves, and paying off that debt are the ones that rise to mind. And maybe members of the Finance Committee have other thoughts too. And the UUA, absolutely, yeah. Those things that we were not able to fund fully, plus some. And getting our cash reserves to a better place. And we certainly have made progress in the last few years, but we need to continue to make that progress. It'll be maybe slow and incremental, but to continue along that path. The Personnel Committee looked at meeting the midpoint of the salary range for every employee. And Bev, jump in here if I'm not answering it correctly. Also, a living wage for our lower paying employees. The living wage now is $18.69. We're not meeting a living wage for some of our staff, and we would like to be able to do that. And closing the gender gap, for sure, for staff. Edith, did you have a question?
For the handicapped who, I think I'm the only one, who don't have internet, is it possible to have a printout of that picture of the whole congregation and all that?
Yes, we will make sure you get that picture. Any other questions, comments? Okay. Thank you.